Watch as Karen's kids try to sneak onto my property, and things get hilarious. Jake Thompson had lived in the quiet suburban cul-de-sac for 7 years, and he'd always prided himself on being a good neighbor. The modest ranch-style home he shared with his wife, Emily, and their 2 children, Lily, 10, and Max, 7, had been a haven of stability since they first moved in. At the heart of their backyard was an above-ground pool, a 24-foot round behemoth that had been both a blessing and a burden since the day they installed it. When Jake first purchased the pool 5 years earlier, it seemed like the perfect addition to their family life. Weekend barbecues, summer birthday parties, and lazy Sunday afternoons had all revolved around that blue oasis. The neighborhood of children would gather, parents would chat, and for a few precious months each year, the pool was the centerpiece of their social world. Jake had been meticulous about its maintenance, dedicating countless hours to cleaning, chemical balancing, and ensuring it was a safe, inviting space for everyone. But time and circumstance had a way of changing perspectives. What once felt like a dream was now becoming a constant source of stress and financial strain. The pool's liner had developed persistent leaks that were becoming increasingly expensive to repair. The pump system was on its last legs, and replacement parts were becoming harder to find for the aging model. Emily had been the first to suggest removal, pointing out the mounting costs and the increasing amount of time Jake was spending on maintenance. The final decision came after a particularly difficult summer. Max had developed severe allergies that made swimming uncomfortable, and Lily was becoming more interested in team sports than casual swimming. The pool that had once brought the family together was now feeling more like an obligation than a joy. Jake had carefully calculated the costs between repairs, chemicals, winter coverings, and the increasing water bills. A pool was costing them nearly $2,000 a year, and not including the initial installation costs. More than the financial burden, Jake was concerned about safety. He'd always been cautious, installing a high fence and teaching the children strict pool safety rules. But as Max and Lily grew older and more independent, the constant worry about potential accidents weighed heavily on his mind. The neighborhood had changed too. New families had moved in with younger children who might not understand pool safety, and Jake couldn't bear the thought of any potential accidents. The decision to remove the pool was not made lightly. Jake spent weeks researching removal methods, consulting with local contractors, and planning every detail. He wanted the process to be smooth, efficient, and minimally disruptive to the neighborhood. Little did he know that his careful planning would soon be tested in ways he could never have imagined. On a crisp Saturday morning in early September, Jake began the first stages of pool removal. The blue water that had been a constant backdrop to their summer memories was soon to be drained, the metal frame dismantled, and the ground prepared for a new landscaping project Emily had been dreaming about. What should have been a simple home improvement project was about to become the catalyst for a neighborhood drama that would test Jake's patience, resolve, and understanding of community dynamics. Melissa Hartwell, known to everyone on Sycamore Lane as Karen, was not your typical suburban neighbor. At 52, she was a retired real estate agent who had made it her life's mission to maintain what she perceived as the perfect neighborhood aesthetic. Her immaculately manicured corner lot stood as a testament to her obsessive attention to detail. Not a blade of grass out of place, not a single leaf allowed to rest on her pristine lawn for more than an hour. When Melissa first moved into the neighborhood 3 years ago, she immediately began her self-appointed role as the unofficial neighborhood inspector. Her first targets had been the Thompsons' hedges, which she claimed were at least 2 inches too high, according to some obscure HOA regulation she had memorized. Jake had humored her initially, trimming the hedges to her exact specifications, hoping to maintain neighborly peace. But Karen's complaints were never truly about regulations. They were about control. Her meticulously curated worldview left no room for individual expression or personal choice. The pool had been a particular point of contention since the day it was installed. She would often make passive-aggressive comments during neighborhood gatherings, suggesting that above-ground pools were tacky and decreased property values. As Jake began the pool removal process, Melissa's true colors emerged in full force. The first salvo came in the form of a carefully crafted, typewritten note delivered to Jake's mailbox. The letter was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive communication, citing obscure neighborhood guidelines and potential zoning violations. She argued that the pool's removal would create significant disruption to the neighborhood's aesthetic and potentially violate multiple HOA bylaws. Dear Mr. Thompson, the letter began, it has come to my attention that you are proceeding with an unauthorized modification to your property that may have significant implications for our community's property values and visual harmony. Emily found the letter first, showing it to Jake with a mix of amusement and frustration. They had heard Karen's complaints before, but this seemed to be escalating. She pulled out the neighborhood HOA handbook they had received when they first moved in, confirming what they already knew: there were no actual violations in Jake's pool removal process. But Karen was just getting started. Within days, she began a systematic campaign of harassment. She would stand at her living room window, openly photographing Jake's property with a high-end camera. The telephoto lens would zoom in on every aspect of the pool removal, capturing each moment with an intensity that bordered on obsessive. Neighborhood children who had once freely played in the area were suddenly warned away from Jake's yard. Karen would stand on her property line, making loud comments about potential safety hazards and unsupervised construction zones. Her voice carried with a shrill quality that seemed designed to draw attention and create maximum discomfort. The other neighbors began to take notice. Some rolled their eyes when Karen's tirades began. Others looked uncomfortable, torn between not wanting to get involved and a growing sense that her behavior was crossing a line. The Thompson children, Lily and Max, started to feel the tension, asking their parents why the mean lady next door was always watching and taking pictures. Jake tried to remain calm, documenting each interaction, keeping a level head. He knew that engaging with Karen directly would only escalate the situation. Little did he know that her complaints were about to take a turn that would shock the entire neighborhood. As the pool removal progressed, Karen's behavior transformed from merely irritating to genuinely concerning. Her surveillance became more systematic with a spreadsheet-like precision that suggested something beyond simple neighborhood nosiness. She began keeping a detailed log of Jake's activities, complete with time-stamped photographs and meticulously written notes about every aspect of the project. The local homeowners association, HOA, became her primary weapon. She bombarded the HOA board with a deluge of emails and letters, each more dramatically worded than the last. One particularly inflammatory missive suggested that Jake's pool removal was part of a larger conspiracy to devalue the entire neighborhood's real estate potential. She attached dozens of photographs, each annotated with circle areas of supposed violations and safety concerns. Jake first became aware of the full extent of her campaign when he received a certified letter from the HOA demanding a detailed explanation of his pool removal process. The document, clearly drafted with Karen's input, questioned everything from the disposal of pool materials to the potential environmental impact of the excavation. It demanded Jake provide a comprehensive plan for site restoration, soil testing, and neighborhood notification. Emily was the first to recognize the true nature of the situation. A lawyer by profession, she understood the subtle art of harassment through bureaucratic channels. "She's trying to bury us in paperwork," Emily told Jake one evening after reviewing the HOA letter. "This is a deliberate attempt to make our lives difficult." The neighborhood began to take sides. Some neighbors, tired of Karen's constant complaints, started to push back. Tom Richards, a retired construction manager who lived 2 doors down, stopped by to offer support. "Don't let her get to you," he advised Jake. "She's done this before. When the Millers moved in 5 years ago, she tried the same tactics." But Karen's tactics were becoming more sophisticated. She began reaching out to local zoning officials, making anonymous complaints about potential permit violations. She contacted the city's building inspection department, suggesting that Jake might be removing the pool without proper permits. Each call was carefully crafted to sound concerned and official, never directly accusatory but laden with implications of potential wrongdoing. The children began to feel the impact most acutely. Lily and Max started to dread going into the backyard, constantly aware of Karen's watchful eyes. They could see her silhouette in the window, always watching, always recording. Max began having trouble sleeping, plagued by nightmares about the mean lady next door, who seemed to be always watching. Jake's work was also affected. As a project manager for a local construction firm, he prided himself on maintaining a professional demeanor. But Karen's constant harassment was beginning to take its toll. He found himself distracted during meetings, constantly checking his phone for potential communications from the HOA or city officials. The pool removal itself became secondary to the growing conflict. What should have been a simple home improvement project had transformed into a neighborhood drama of epic proportions. Jake and Emily began to document everything, every photograph, every communication, every interaction. They understood that with Karen, evidence was their only defense. As the tension mounted, it became clear that this was no longer just about a pool. This was a battle of wills, a test of neighborhood dynamics, and a showcase of one woman's ability to turn a simple home improvement project into a full-scale neighborhood conflict. The Saturday morning was crisp and clear, the kind of day that typically would have been perfect for neighborhood projects. Jake had arrived early, ready to continue dismantling the pool's framework. His careful preparations, tarps laid out, tools organized, safety equipment in place, stood in stark contrast to Karen's chaotic approach to the unfolding drama. It began innocently enough. Jake was carefully removing the pool's metal support beams, methodically working to ensure minimal disruption to the surrounding landscape. The rhythmic sound of his tools was interrupted by the sharp click of a camera shutter. Karen had positioned herself at the edge of her property line, her expensive digital camera capturing every movement. At first, Jake tried to ignore her. He'd become adept at blocking out her constant surveillance, focusing instead on the task at hand. But Karen was not one to be ignored. Her voice cut through the morning, quiet, sharp, and accusatory. "You're destroying the neighborhood's aesthetic," she shouted, her voice rising with each word. "Do you have any idea how much damage you're doing to property values?" Jake continued working, offering a brief, polite wave without engaging further. This only seemed to inflame Karen's anger. She began to move closer to the property line, her camera now accompanied by a digital voice recorder. Neighbors began to peek out of their windows, sensing the brewing confrontation. "I'm documenting everything," Karen continued, her voice reaching a fever pitch. "The HOA will hear about this. The city will hear about this. You can't just do whatever you want." Tom Richards, the retired construction manager, stepped out onto his front porch. Other neighbors began to gather, not out of support for Karen, but out of a mixture of curiosity and concern about the escalating situation. Jake's wife, Emily, sensing the tension, came out to stand near her husband. A lawyer by profession, she understood the importance of maintaining composure. "Melissa," she called out calmly, "we've followed all proper procedures. The pool removal is completely legal." But Karen was beyond reason. She began to list off a litany of supposed violations: zoning issues, potential environmental hazards, imaginary HOA regulations. Her voice grew more frantic, her accusations more wild and disconnected from reality. The neighborhood children watched from windows and driveways. Lily and Max Thompson huddled close to their mother, witnessing the bizarre spectacle. Other kids whispered and pointed, sensing the adult drama unfolding. What happened next would become the talk of Sycamore Lane for months to come. Karen, in her increasingly agitated state, stepped onto Jake's property. It was a line she had never crossed before, and everyone knew it. Jake stood his ground, tool still in hand, watching her carefully. "You're trespassing," Jake said firmly, his voice calm but clear. "You need to step back onto your own property." Karen seemed not to hear him. She continued her tirade, moving closer, her camera still clicking rapidly. The tension was palpable. Neighbors held their breath, wondering how far this would go. Tom Richards took a step forward, ready to intervene if necessary. Emily's hand moved subtly, preparing to dial the police if the situation escalated further. The quiet suburban street had transformed into a battleground of neighborhood politics, passive-aggressive warfare, and one woman's inexplicable vendetta. Jake remained calm, but everyone could see the line had been crossed. This was no longer just about a pool removal. This was about boundaries, literal and metaphorical. In the days following the confrontation, Karen's behavior escalated from merely irritating to potentially dangerous. Her tactics became increasingly sophisticated and malicious, transforming her from a neighborhood nuisance into a serious threat to the Thompson family's peace of mind. The first indication of her new strategy came early one morning. Jake discovered a series of landscaping items strategically placed along the property line: potted plants, decorative stones, and even a small garden gnome, positioned in such a way that they deliberately encroached on his property. Each item was meticulously placed to create confusion about the exact property boundary, a classic passive-aggressive move designed to provoke a response. Emily documented everything. As a lawyer, she understood the importance of creating a paper trail. She photographed each item, measured their precise locations, and began researching local ordinances about property line disputes. Jake watched her work, simultaneously impressed by her methodical approach and worried about how far Karen might be willing to go. The psychological warfare continued. Anonymous complaints began to flood various city departments. The building inspection office received multiple reports suggesting that Jake's pool removal was violating environmental regulations. The Parks and Recreation Department was told that the excavation might be damaging protected root systems of nearby trees. Each complaint was crafted to sound legitimate, with just enough technical language to seem credible. Max and Lily began to feel the strain of the ongoing conflict. At school, Max became withdrawn, uncomfortable discussing his home situation. Lily, more outspoken, started to ask pointed questions about why their neighbor seemed so intent on making their lives difficult. The children's emotional well-being became an additional source of stress for Jake and Emily. Local utility companies became unwitting participants in Karen's campaign. Multiple service providers received calls reporting potential underground line damage during the pool removal. Each call required an official investigation, forcing Jake to repeatedly prove the safety and legality of his home improvement project. The neighborhood dynamics shifted subtly. Some residents who had previously been neutral began to take sides. Tom Richards, the retired construction manager, started to actively support the Thompsons. He would casually drop by, offering both practical advice and moral support. Other neighbors would leave supportive notes or wave encouragingly when Jake was working in the yard. But Karen was far from finished. She began a more insidious campaign of misinformation. Social media became her new weapon. Using various anonymous accounts, she started posting cryptic comments about neighborhood destruction and property value threats. Local community groups became battlegrounds of speculation and rumor. Jake's work began to suffer. The constant stress of dealing with Karen's harassment was taking its toll. He found himself distracted during meetings, constantly checking his phone for potential new complaints or investigations. Emily suggested they start keeping a detailed log of every interaction, every complaint, every unusual occurrence. The decision to involve law enforcement was not made lightly. Jake and Emily spent weeks carefully documenting every interaction, every complaint, and every bizarre incident involving Karen. They consulted with a local attorney who specialized in harassment and property disputes, meticulously building a case that went far beyond a simple neighborhood disagreement. Their evidence was comprehensive. The 3-ring binder now contained hundreds of pages of documentation, photographs of strategic property line placements, copies of anonymous complaints, screenshots of social media posts, and a detailed timeline of Karen's escalating behavior. Emily's professional training as a lawyer proved invaluable, ensuring every piece of evidence was carefully cataloged and annotated. The breaking point came on a Tuesday afternoon. Karen had taken to parking her car at an angle that partially blocked the Thompsons' driveway, just close enough to be provocative, but just far enough to avoid clear-cut trespassing charges. When Jake attempted to back out, he was forced to perform an elaborate maneuver, narrowly avoiding her vehicle. Local law enforcement had become familiar with the ongoing dispute. Officer Rachel Martinez, a 10-year veteran of the suburban precinct, had been following the case with increasing concern. She had seen neighborhood disputes before, but Karen's behavior was different, calculated, persistent, and increasingly dangerous. When the officers arrived, Jake presented the comprehensive documentation with calm professionalism. The binder told a story of systematic harassment that went far beyond typical neighborhood tensions. Photographs showed the strategic placement of objects on the property line, documented the excessive surveillance, and illustrated the impact on his children. Officer Martinez listened carefully, her expression growing more serious with each piece of evidence. The anonymous complaints to various city departments, the social media campaigns, the deliberate attempts to create obstacles. It was a textbook case of harassment that extended far beyond mere nuisance. The police interview with Karen revealed the depths of her obsession. She maintained a calm exterior, but her responses were filled with contradictions. She claimed to be protecting the neighborhood's best interests, yet couldn't provide any substantive evidence of actual violations. Her carefully crafted narrative began to crumble under professional questioning. Tom Richards, the retired construction manager, provided additional testimony. He had been documenting Karen's behavior as well, offering an independent third-party perspective that added credibility to Jake's claims. Other neighbors began to come forward, sharing their own experiences with Karen's aggressive tactics. The legal intervention was multi-pronged. The police issued an official warning about harassment, documenting the incident in an official report. The Homeowners Association was provided with a comprehensive briefing, forcing them to take the situation seriously. Jake and Emily's attorney began preparing documentation for a potential restraining order. For the first time, Karen seemed to realize the gravity of her situation. The carefully constructed facade of neighborhood vigilance was crumbling, replaced by the very real possibility of legal consequences. Her attempts to control and manipulate had backfired spectacularly.